Listen, do you hear it? That silence that isn't quite silence. The hush that falls when the world has finally finished its noise for the night. That is where we live. You and I, that is where I have been waiting for you. Welcome back. Welcome back to the vault. Welcome back to this corner of the world where nothing is required of you. Not your name, not your obligations, not the shape of whoever you were pretending to be today. In here, you are simply a seeker, a quiet, intelligent, searching soul who has found their way through the dark to a single flickering light. There, that is better. A clean flame, a steady flame. Watch how it breathes, pulling itself upward in one slow, reaching gesture, then settling back into its own warm circle. It will be with us all night. I am Morgana, and this is Midnight Manuscripts. Before we begin, I want to take a moment, a real moment, not a hurried one, to acknowledge that our circle has grown. 16 of you now sit in the Midnight Observatory. 16 seekers. You know who you are. And if you are new tonight, if this is your first time finding your way to this candlelit room, then I want you to know that you arrived at exactly the right moment. For those who are new, let me tell you about the obsidian etching. The first 100 seekers to subscribe to this channel to truly join us will have a name of their choosing carved into the stone of this vault. Not their real name necessarily. A name that belongs to them in this space. A historical figure, a philosopher, a mystic, a forgotten voice from the margins of the ancient world. Simply subscribe, like this video, and leave your chosen name in a comment below. The stone is patient. It will wait. Tonight, we open a text that has been quietly changing people for over 100 years. The Kybalion. Say it with me if you like, quietly. Kybalion. Even the word has a kind of gravity to it, a weight that suggests it has been spoken in hushed rooms for a very long time, passed from mouth to ear, and from hand to hand in the dark. Published in 1908. Authored by 3 initiates. A name so deliberately opaque that scholars have been arguing over who those 3 actually were for well over a century. The leading theory, and I find it the most compelling, is that the primary author was William Walker Atkinson, a Chicago lawyer turned New Thought philosopher who wrote under several pseudonyms during the same period. But whether the book was written by one mind or three, or whether those three were channeling something far older than themselves, matters less than what the book contains. And what it contains, dear seeker, is a key, or at least a description of the lock. The Kybalion presents itself as a distillation of the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great, a figure who occupies that fascinating space between myth and history, between God and man, between Egypt and Greece. The ancient Egyptians called him Thoth, keeper of the moon, scribe of the gods, weigher of souls. The Greeks absorbed him and gave him their own divine messengers, sandals, and caduceus. And somewhere in that long act of cultural translation, a body of philosophical and mystical teaching accrued around his name. Texts, now collectively called the Hermetica, that deal with the nature of God, the cosmos, the mind, and the soul. The Kybalion claims to be a modern re-expression of that ancient wisdom. It makes no small claims. It says, with quiet confidence, that what follows are the laws governing all of reality. Everything, all of it, from the thought forming behind your closed eyes right now, to the turning of the galaxy above your roof. Let us see if it is right. Part 2. The 7 Laws, a Deep Exploration. There are 7 principles in the Kybalion. 7 has always been a significant number in esoteric thought. The 7 classical planets, the 7 notes of the musical scale, the 7 days of creation. Whether the ancients chose 7 because they found 7 principles, or whether they found 7 because they were looking for them, is a question the Kybalion would answer by pointing to the principle of correspondence. The pattern recurs because the pattern is true. We will take each principle slowly, carefully, the way you might examine an object in candlelight, turning it, watching how the shadows move across its surface. There is no rush, is nowhere to be. There is only this room and this flame and these ancient ideas pressing themselves gently against the edges of your mind. Principle the first, mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. I want you to hold that sentence for a moment before I say anything else about it. Not examine it yet, just hold it. Feel the shape of it. The all is mind. The Kybalion uses a very specific word, the all, not a mind. Not the mind in any sense you might be tempted to interpret as your own. The all an infinite, living intelligence from which everything that exists is a mental projection, a thought, a dream. Imagine for a moment the most vivid dream you have ever had. One of those dreams so layered and detailed that when you woke from it, you spent several disoriented seconds wondering which reality was the real one. The faces in that dream felt like real faces. The texture of surfaces in that dream felt like real surfaces. The emotions in that dream were as physiologically real as anything that has ever happened to you in waking life. Your heart was racing. Your palms were damp. The grief or joy or terror was entirely present. Now, who created all of that? You did. Your dreaming mind constructed every atom of that experience from nothing but its own substance. The other people in the dream were not real people. They were projections of your mind, taking on form, personality, even the ability to surprise you. Every building, every landscape, every impossible physics, every sound, all of it was your mind being. The principle of mentalism says, what if this is also true of the universe? Now, at this point, many people make the understandable but philosophically premature leap of saying, oh, so nothing is real. The Kybalion is quick to correct this. The mental nature of the universe does not make it less real. It makes it differently real. The dream is real while you are in it. The experience is real. The laws that govern the dream, if we learn them, are genuinely governing. What mentalism actually opens up is a question of relationship. If we are within the mind of the All, then we are not separate from it. We are expressions of it. Thoughts within a thought. And just as your dreaming mind can generate a character who then shapes the dream from within, perhaps conscious minds like yours have a genuine creative relationship with the substance of reality. This principle has echoes in places you might not expect. In the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, the act of observation affects what is observed. Matter exists in a superposition of states until a conscious mind collapses it into a single outcome. Physicists have spent a century finding this result uncomfortable. The Hermeticist would have found it obvious. The All is mind. The universe is mental. Let that rest behind your eyes like warmth. Principle the second, correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. As within, so without. As without, so within. This is probably the most quoted Hermetic axiom in existence. It has been printed on phone cases and carved into crystals and embroidered on altar cloths. But familiarity has a way of smoothing the edges off ideas until they no longer cut. So let us restore the edge. The principle of correspondence states that there are planes of existence, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and that these planes, though different in substance and scale, are governed by the same structural laws. They correspond to each other. What is true in one is reflected in the others. Consider the atom. At the center, a nucleus dense, positively charged, containing most of the atom's mass, but occupying almost none of its volume. Orbiting that nucleus at enormous distances relative to their size, electrons. The atom is, in essence, almost entirely empty space. It is a system of relationships between tiny charged bodies moving in the void. Now consider the solar system. At the center, the sun dense, massive, containing most of the system's mass, but occupying a fraction of its volume, orbiting that sun at enormous distances relative to their size, planets. The solar system is, in essence, almost entirely empty space. It is a system of relationships between bodies moving in the void. The Hermeticist looks at these two things and does not say, "What a charming coincidence." They say, "Of course, the same intelligence that designed one designed the other, using the same blueprint." But correspondence goes further still. As within, so without. The correspondence is not only between the large and the small, the macrocosm and the microcosm. It is between the inner world and the outer one. The Kybalion suggests, and this is where Hermeticism intersects most provocatively with modern psychology, that the world a person inhabits is, in important ways, a correspondence of their internal state, not in a simple, literal, transactional way, not a promise that positive thoughts create a pleasant Tuesday. Something subtler, something about how the patterns of a mind, the recurring shapes of fear and longing and assumption, create the lens through which all experience is perceived, and that perception and reality are not nearly as separate as we like to believe. The ancient astronomers studied the heavens to understand the earth. The Hermetic philosopher studies their own interior to understand the world, and the knowledge flows in both directions, always. As above, so below. As within, so without. Principle the third, vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. In 1903, a physicist named Philip Lenard received the Nobel Prize for his work on cathode rays, the behavior of electrons, those orbiting particles we mentioned a moment ago. 5 years later, the Kybalion was published, stating that everything from the densest rock to the highest thought is in a state of constant motion. The timing was not coincidence. The early 20th century was a period when science and mysticism were looking at each other across a narrowing gap. The principle of vibration, makes a radical claim that modern physics has since largely validated. Matter is not still. Even a rock sitting on a windowsill in the middle of the night is a storm of atomic activity, electrons racing their orbits, nuclei trembling, the whole structure in a state of ceaseless internal motion that merely appears static to our unaided senses. Your hand resting on the blanket is a galaxy of movement. What differs between a rock and a thought, between lead and light, between matter and spirit, says the Kybalion, is not substance, it is rate. All of these things are the same substance, vibrating at different frequencies. The difference between what you can see and what you cannot see is not a difference in what is real. It is a difference in how fast reality is moving. This has a practical implication that Hermeticism takes seriously. If the difference between one state of being and another is vibrational frequency, then frequency can be changed. The Kybalion speaks of the art of mental transmutation, the ability to shift the rate at which a thing vibrates, to change its character, to move it along the scale from the dense to the refined. This is what the alchemist was really doing, say the Hermeticists, not trying to turn lead into gold through chemistry, but demonstrating symbolically and practically the principle that every substance can be transformed, because every substance is the same substance at a different speed. And the human mind. The Kybalion places the mind near the upper end of the vibrational scale, not at the top, but far from the bottom. A mind refined through discipline, philosophy, and the kind of deep quiet we are practicing together right now is, in Hermetic terms, a mind vibrating at a higher rate, more light, less dense, more correspondent to the spiritual planes. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Principle the fourth, polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. Here is where the Kybalion begins to do something genuinely radical to ordinary thinking. not radical in the sense of strange or disruptive. Radical in the original sense, going to the root. The principle of polarity asks us to reconsider the entire concept of opposition. We live our lives as though good and evil, love and hate, hot and cold, are fundamental opposites, as though they are different things entirely, separated by an unbridgeable gulf. The Kybalion says, "Look more carefully. Take temperature. Is cold a thing? Science would say no. Cold is not a substance or a force. Cold is the relative absence of heat. You cannot add cold to something. You can only remove heat. Hot and cold are not two different things. They are two ends of a single measurement. A thermometer does not have a hot side and a cold side. It has one scale. The Kybalion asks us to apply this insight everywhere. Love and hate. Are these fundamentally different things? Or are they poles of the same emotional axis, one end characterized by deep positive attachment, the other by deep negative attachment, both states involving intense focus on and investment in another person? Have you ever noticed how quickly profound love can tip toward something that looks like hate when wounded, and how indifference, not hate, is actually love's true opposite? A person you have never met cannot make you hate them. Hate requires investment. It requires the same orientation of heart that love requires. Courage and cowardice. Not different things, different positions on the same scale, says the Kybalion, which means that mental transmutation, the art of deliberately shifting along the scale, is possible. You do not transform fear into courage by introducing a new ingredient. You shift your position on the pole. The raw material is the same. The location changes. There is something deeply calming in this principle, I find. It means that nothing is as fixed as it appears. The quality you most wish to be free of is not a wall. It is a position on a scale, and scales can be moved along. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Extremes meet. Principle the fifth, rhythm. Everything flows out and in everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum's swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. This is the principle I find myself returning to in the small hours of difficult periods. Let me tell you why. The principle of rhythm does not promise you that things will get better. It does something more reliable than that. It describes why they inevitably do. The universe, says the Kybalion, is rhythmic at every scale. The tides come in and they go out. The stars are born and they die. Civilizations rise and fall. Economies expand and contract. Seasons turn. Moods lift and descend. Even your breathing right now, in and out, is a small demonstration of a principle that governs everything. The pendulum swings, always, and here is the mathematical truth at the heart of this principle that the Kybalion makes explicit. The measure of the swing in one direction is the measure of the swing in the other. The pendulum that swings far to the left must swing equally far to the right. Not might, must. Which means that whatever you are experiencing tonight that feels low or contracted or still, the very depth of that descent is already silently writing the height of the ascent that follows. The pendulum does not stop mid-swing. It cannot. Rhythm is the nature of the universe, not a policy that can be revoked. Now, the Kybalion also says something important about the master, the person who has developed a degree of hermetic understanding. The master does not wait passively for the swing, nor do they resist it, which is futile. What the master does is learn to neutralize it, to step out of the automatic mechanical sway by rising mentally to a higher plane of awareness. This is how the Kybalion describes it. The master, by a process of mental discipline, refuses to be carried by the pendulum. They observe the rhythm without being swept up in it. When the swing comes toward depression, they do not deny it, they acknowledge it, understand it as a law in operation, and refuse to fully identify with it. They they remain, as much as possible, the observer rather than the observed. This is, I think, what certain contemplative traditions call the witnessing self, that quiet, steady part of awareness that can watch the weather of the mind without becoming the weather. The Kybalion got there first. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. Rhythm compensates. Principle the sixth, cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. The word chance has always been, philosophically, a placeholder, a label we attach to events whose causal chain we cannot trace. When someone says, "It was just luck," what they mean, if they are being precise, is I cannot identify the causes that produced this outcome. Not that there were no causes. The principle of cause and effect is, at one level, simply the principle of universal determinism. The recognition that events do not erupt from nothing. Every event has a prior event that precipitated it, and that prior event had a prior event, and the chain extends backward in an unbroken sequence through everything that has ever happened. But the Kybalion does something subtle here that I want to draw your attention to. It says, there are many planes of causation. This is where Hermeticism diverges from simple material determinism. It is not merely that physical events cause physical events in a mechanical sequence. There are also mental causes and spiritual causes operating on their corresponding planes that influence the physical. A thought is a cause. A firmly held belief is a cause. A shift in attention is a cause. This brings us to what may be the most practically important implication of this principle. If everything is governed by cause and effect, and if thought operates on a causal plane, then the person who learns to govern their thoughts has moved from being an effect to being a cause. The Kybalion puts it this way: most people are carried by by the currents of circumstance, acted upon by external forces, pushed by the causes around them, becoming effects of effects of effects, all the way down. The master and the Kybalion uses this word not arrogantly, but descriptively, the way one might say the master craftsman. The master has learned to place themselves on the causal side of the ledger, more often with more deliberateness, by understanding what the laws are and how to work with rather than against them. Nothing happens by chance. Chance is merely a name for law not recognized. What law, then, is operating in your life right now that you have not yet recognized? Let that question float. You do not need to answer it tonight. Simply let it sit in the room with us. Principle the 7th, gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The Kybalion is explicit and careful about this. The principle of gender has nothing to do with the gender of human bodies or the social roles assigned to them. It predates those conversations by a great distance. The Hermetic masculine and feminine are not about men and women. They are about two universal creative principles that operate together on every plane of existence, in every phenomenon, in every mind. The masculine principle, in Hermetic terms, is the principle of directed activity, the projecting, initiating, penetrating force. It is the energy that goes outward, that acts upon, that initiates change. In the mind, it is will, the deliberate focusing of attention toward an object, the conscious, choosing, directing faculty. The feminine principle is the principle of receptive creativity, the receiving, gestating, generating force. It is the energy that receives, that holds, that transforms the seed into form. In the mind, it is the unconscious, that vast, fertile, largely unmapped territory where ideas are grown in the dark, where intentions are processed and transformed into intuitions, where the seeds of conscious thought gestate into the complex fruit of insight and imagination. And both must be present. both must be active. Neither alone is sufficient. A mind that is all masculine principle, all will, all directed effort, all pushing and striving and conscious forcing, will be a mind that burns itself out, that generates enormous heat and very little light, that works hard without depth. A mind that is all feminine principle, all receptivity, all dreaming and drifting and waiting for inspiration to arrive, will be a mind that receives everything and transforms nothing, that is rich in imagery and poor in completion. The creative act in art, in philosophy, in science, in any field of genuine human making, requires both. The directed will of the masculine to plant the intention clearly and deeply into the fertile ground of the unconscious feminine, and then the patience to step back and allow the mysterious generative process to do its work. All great makers have described some version of this process, the period of intense, directed effort followed by withdrawal, followed by the sudden arrival of the thing fully formed, as though from somewhere else. The mathematician Henri Poincaré described solving one of his most important theorems while stepping onto a bus, having abandoned his desk after weeks of concentrated work, his unconscious presenting the solution the moment his conscious mind relaxed its grip. The composer Brahms said his best melodies came to him in a state between sleeping and waking. The Hermeticist would say, of course, you planted the seed, the ground grew it. What else would happen? Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Part 3. The hidden history of the text. Now, before we enter the long, slow drift toward sleep, I want to spend a little time in the vault's library, in the history of this remarkable document and the tradition it draws from. I find it always deepens the experience of these principles to understand where they came from, through whose hands they have traveled, by what strange routes they arrived on the shelf in 1908. The word Hermeticism comes, of course, from Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. But this figure is already a composite. he emerges from that extraordinary cultural ferment of Alexandria, Egypt, somewhere around the 1st to 3rd centuries of the Common Era, a period when Greek philosophy, Egyptian religion, Jewish mysticism, and early Christian theology were all crowded together in one of the most intellectually fertile cities the world has ever produced. The Hermetic texts, the Corpus Hermeticum, were written during this period, probably by several authors in Greek, recording a dialogue between Hermes Trismegistus and various students. They claimed to preserve ancient Egyptian wisdom, and for more than 1,000 years, serious thinkers believed them. The Renaissance philosopher Marsilio Ficino, working under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici in 15th century Florence, was actually translating Plato from Greek into Latin when a courier arrived carrying a manuscript of the Corpus Hermeticum. Cosimo told him to stop working on Plato and translate the Hermetic texts immediately. They were older, more important, more urgent. The Renaissance was, in many ways, shaped by that decision. The ideas of Ficino's translations of the Hermetic texts spread through humanist circles across Europe. Hermeticism influenced Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake in Rome in 1600, partly for his Copernican cosmology, and partly for his hermetically informed philosophy of an infinite universe. It influenced John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's court advisor, and arguably the most learned man in England in the 16th century. It influenced Francis Bacon, whose vision of scientific inquiry was entangled with a hermetic understanding of nature as a book to be read. And in 1614, a classical scholar named Isaac Casaubon published a devastating textual analysis. He demonstrated, through linguistic analysis, looking at the vocabulary, the grammatical constructions, the historical references, that the Hermetic texts could not have been written in ancient Egypt. They were written in the period they were found in. Hermes Trismegistus was not an Egyptian sage who predated Moses. He was a literary creation of the Alexandrian philosophical world. For many, this was the end. Casaubon's debunking removed the claim to antique authority, and Hermeticism was gradually sidelined as the scientific revolution gathered pace. But here is what I find interesting. The Kybalion, written in 1908, is perfectly aware of this history. It never actually claims that Hermes Trismegistus was a real Egyptian. It says, whether Hermes was a man or a god, or a symbol for a collective of illumined minds, matters less than the principles themselves. The truth of a law is not dependent on the biography of its discoverer. Gravity was true before Newton named it. The Kybalion plants its flag in the principles, not the pedigree. I find that intellectually honest, more honest, perhaps, than the original texts it draws from. The Kybalion also found itself in an interesting position in 1908. The New Thought movement, of which William Atkinson was a significant figure, was attempting to synthesize ancient philosophical traditions with the emerging psychological sciences and the democratic spirit of American pragmatism. What can these ideas actually do for a person? How do you work with them? What does it mean in practice to understand that everything vibrates, that you exist on the causal side of your life? The Kybalion is therefore unusual among esoteric texts in that it is explicitly practical. It is not content to describe the laws. It insists on the possibility of mental transmutation, of using these laws deliberately, the way a craftsman uses the properties of materials. You do not fight gravity when you build a bridge. You understand gravity and design around it. You do not resist the vibrational nature of reality. You learn to tune it. This is the secret of the masters, as the Kybalion calls them. Not supernatural powers, not special dispensation from the universe, simply a deeper understanding of the laws everyone else is subject to, but few have troubled themselves to study. Part 4. The Deep Waters Synthesis and Meditation. The flame is growing quieter now. It has settled into its work, as perhaps have you. I want to spend some time now weaving these 7 principles together, because they are not seven separate laws, but seven facets of a single integrated understanding. When you can hold all seven at once, something shifts. A kind of coherence becomes visible. Let us begin by standing back from the list and looking at its shape. The first principle, mentalism, establishes the ground. Everything is mental. This is the foundation on which the other six rest. If everything is mind, then the laws that follow are laws about how mind works, how this universal dreaming intelligence structures its dream. The second principle, correspondence, describes the architecture of that dream. It is not random. It is self-similar, fractal, the same patterns repeating at every scale, the same structural logic expressing itself in the atom and the galaxy and the thought. The third, fourth, and fifth, vibration, polarity, rhythm, describe the dynamics, how the dream moves. Everything vibrates. Everything moves along a scale between poles. Everything moves rhythmically between those poles. These three together describe a universe that is ceaselessly active, ceaselessly oscillating, ceaselessly alive. The sixth, cause and effect, describes the logic of the dream, how one movement creates the next, how nothing arises without precedent, how the dream is not chaotic but lawful, even when its laws are not yet recognized. And the seventh, gender, describes the creative engine, how the dream makes new things, how the interplay of two principles, the projective and the receptive, the seed and the soil, the will and the imagination, is the source of all generation on every plane. Together, these seven principles describe a universe that is alive, intelligent, dynamic, lawful, and creative. A universe that is, in some deep sense, more like a mind than like a machine, more like a dream than a factory, more like a work of art than a mechanism. I want to tell you about a thought experiment that I return to often in these late hours. Imagine someone, call them a student, who hears these 7 principles for the first time and immediately asks, "But are they true? Can they be proven?" The Kybalion's answer would be, I think, apply them and see. That is the only proof available for laws of this order, the proof of application, of living inside them and observing whether the world makes more or less sense as a result. But I think there is another kind of truth operating here, separate from empirical validation. A philosophical tradition that endures for 2,500 years, from the Alexandrian texts through the Renaissance, through the New Thought movement to the present moment, when seekers are still finding their way to it in the middle of the night, does not endure because it is pleasant. It endures because it resonates, because it maps something in human experience that other frameworks do not adequately address. The experience of the universe as fundamentally mental, as more dreamlike than machine-like. The sense that the inner and outer worlds are not truly separate. The observation that opposites are more like each other than they seem. The recognition that everything in one's life moves in cycles. The conviction that nothing happens without a cause, including the events that feel most random or unjust. The creative experience of will and receptivity working together. These are recognitions, not merely theories. They describe things people have actually noticed. The philosophy built around them may be more or less accurate as a description of physical reality, but as a description of human experience, as a map of what it feels like to be a conscious being in a mysterious universe. The Kybalion has a certain kind of truth that survives every debunking. Part 5, The Slow Descent. Let the words come less quickly now. We are beginning the long walk down. The corridor narrows gently. The light grows warmer. There is nothing to hold on to and nothing to fear. Only the slow, pleasant sinking of a mind that has been well fed and is now content to rest. Feel the weight of your body, all of it, not as a burden but as a gift. The specific, particular arrangement of matter that is uniquely yours, settling down into whatever surface holds you. the mattress, the pillow, the blanket. You are held. The surface beneath you is solid, trustworthy, patient. It has been holding things for a very long time. Let us revisit the 7 principles, but slowly now, without analysis, simply as sounds that carry something worth carrying into sleep. The all is mind. The universe is mental. What this means at the edge of sleep is this: the universe that contains you is alive, intelligent. It is not indifferent machinery. You are not an accident inside it. You are a thought within a mind that is conscious of you. As above, so below. As within, so without. The world you see is not separate from you. There is a correspondence between what lives in you and what appears around you. This means that the quiet you are building inside yourself tonight, this peace, this settling, is not merely private. It corresponds outward into your days, into your relationships, into the texture of your waking life. Nothing rests. Everything vibrates. Even now, even in this stillness, you are in motion. The electrons in your cells are racing their orbits. Your atoms are trembling with the ancient vitality of existence. You are, even in sleep, a busy and luminous event. And as you rest, your vibration is changing, settling from the busy frequencies of the day towards something slower, deeper, more resonant. Everything is dual. Everything has its poles. Whatever the day held that was difficult, whatever pulled you toward the cold end of the scale, is one pole of something. Its opposite already exists, not as a wish or a hope, but as a mathematical certainty. Somewhere on the same axis, the warmth waits. You do not need to reach for it tonight. Simply knowing it exists is enough. Everything flows. Everything has its tides. Rhythm compensates. Your breathing is proof of this principle. In and out, in and out. There is no instruction more fundamental than this, no practice more ancient. The rhythm of the breath is the rhythm of the universe, scaled to the size of a human chest. Let it find its own pace now, not the pace of effort, the pace of rest. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Nothing escapes the law. The cause you are laying down tonight, this choice to rest, to be still, to let your mind find its way into the deep, will have its effects. Good sleep is a cause with consequences in every dimension of your life. Your body repairs during sleep. Your memory consolidates. Your unconscious processes what the conscious mind could not hold. By choosing this, by lying here, listening, allowing, you are planting causes in good ground. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. The day is the active principle. The night is the receptive principle. What you have driven and directed and willed into being through the hours of light is now ready to be received by the dark. The night will work with it. The feminine principle of your unconscious mind will take the seeds you planted today and begin, quietly, patiently, to grow something from them. Do not interfere. Simply allow. Part 6. The Whispered Initiation. There is a passage near the beginning of the Kybalion that I want to share with you now. Slowly, almost without interpretation. Just the words and the candle and the dark. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. I have always loved that. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. It is an image of a door that is not locked from the outside. Wisdom is not withheld by its guardians. It withholds itself until the receiving mind is ready, not as punishment, not as gatekeeping, but as a natural law, the way seed cannot take root in ground that is not yet prepared. And the ears of understanding are not ears of knowledge. not the ears of someone who has read the most books. They are ears that have been made quiet enough, patient enough, still enough to actually hear. This is what we practice here, in this room, in these hours. We are practicing the stillness that makes hearing possible, not listening for anything in particular, simply being quiet enough that if something wants to be heard, we will not drown it out. The Kybalion also contains a line that has functioned, for me, almost as a kind of private talisman. It goes, "The master does not laugh at the dream. The master knows that the dream is real in its own way." This life, with its noise and its weight and its inexplicable beauty, is the dream of the all, real in its own way, governed by real laws, worth taking seriously, worth being here for. Worth the care and attention of a quiet mind. Part 7. The Deep Sleep Induction. Let the candle become a softness behind your eyes now, not something to look at, something to dissolve into. Your forehead is smooth. The muscles behind your eyes have nothing left to hold. Your jaw is soft. Your throat is open and easy. Your shoulders have forgotten what they were carrying. Your arms are heavy. Your hands are still. Your chest rises and falls. And you do not choose that movement. It simply happens. Taken care of. Managed by something older and wiser than your conscious mind. Your body is already beginning its night work, the work you never have to supervise, repair, restoration, the quiet cellular housekeeping of a body that loves you in its way. Let the principles come like slow tide now. Just words, just gentle weight. The all is mind. As above, so below. Everything vibrates. Everything has its poles. everything has its rhythm. Every cause has its effect. Gender in everything. Seven laws. Seven quiet truths. Each one settling into a different part of you, like stones placed gently into still water, each one sending its rings outward, further and further, until the rings are too wide and too slow to see, until the water is still again. You are the water. You were always the water. The Kybalion says that a master is simply one who understands the laws and works with them. You do not need to become a master tonight. You do not need to become anything tonight. Tonight, you need only to allow what is already true of you to be true without interference. You are a mind. You correspond to the universe around you. You vibrate at a frequency that is your own. You have poles, and you are somewhere on the scale tonight. And wherever you are is where you need to be. You are in the tide of a rhythm far larger than you, and the tide is carrying you gently. You are both cause and effect, both seed and soil. You contain both poles of the creative force, both the will to make and the quiet that lets the making happen. The candle goes out, not dramatically, gently, the way a thought goes out at the edge of sleep, not extinguished, simply completed. The smoke rises in one last slow spiral. It holds the shape of the flame it came from for just a moment, and then it becomes the dark. The seven principles remain. They do not need the candle. They were here before fire. They will be here after every light goes out. They are in you now, carried quietly, the way the body carries everything important without effort, without awareness, simply there when needed. The vault is very quiet. The night is very long. You have all of it. Every moment between now and morning is yours, not to fill, not to solve, simply to rest inside. Thrice great Hermes, whoever you were, wherever the teaching first arose, it arrived here, tonight, in this room, with this mind. That is a kind of correspondence, I think. Part 8. The long silence, repetition for deep sleep. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Everything that exists is a thought within a vast, alive, intelligent all. You are a thought in that mind. A valued thought. A necessary thought. As above, so below. As within, so without. The quiet inside you spreads outward. Nothing rests. Everything vibrates. Your cells are singing. Your atoms are dancing. You are not still. You are deeply, quietly, in motion. Everything has its poles. You are between them now. Resting at the center. nor drawn into the dark. Simply here. Everything flows. Everything has its tides. You are in the tide now. Carried. Held. The tide is taking you somewhere very comfortable. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. Every cause has its effect. You chose rest. Rest is coming. It was always going to. The law was always going to bring it. You have already done what needed to be done. The rest is already written. Gender in everything. Let the active day be received by the patient night. The soil is dark and warm and ready. Everything you lived today is a seed now. Being tended. In the dark. Without your help. Something will grow from it. Something always does. The Seven Principles. Seven quiet laws. Governing a universe. That is alive. Seven quiet laws. In a body. That is resting. 7 quiet laws. Thin a mind. But that is finally the letting go. Good night, seeker. Good night.